There's a moment in every child's life when they realize their parent isn't coming back. For most, that moment becomes a wound that never fully heals. But what happens when that abandonment, that seemingly unforgivable act of walking away, becomes the greatest gift a father could ever give? This is the story of a man who left his children with relatives and disappeared into the shadows of his own broken life. And decades later, those same children stood before the world and thanked him. Not with sarcasm. Not with bitterness. But with genuine, soul-deep gratitude. If that doesn't shake everything you thought you knew about parenthood, sacrifice, and love, then you haven't been paying attention. And if this story hits you the way it should, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, because we're diving into the kind of truth that doesn't just inform, it transforms. His name was Marcus, though the people who knew him in those final years before he left barely recognized the man he'd become. He wasn't always broken. There was a time when Marcus had been the kind of father who wore his children's laughter like a second skin, who believed that his hands, strong, capable hands, could build a life sturdy enough to weather any storm. But life has a way of testing the foundations we build, and Marcus's foundation had been laid on ground far more fragile than he ever realized. The collapse came slowly at first, then all at once. His wife, Elena, died in a car accident on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that should never be remembered for anything except its mundane predictability. But there she was, gone in an instant, and Marcus found himself standing in a world that no longer made sense. He had 3 children, Sarah, 9 years old with her mother's eyes and relentless curiosity, Daniel, 7, who still believed his father could fix anything with enough duct tape and determination, and little Maya, barely 4, who asked every night when mommy was coming home. Marcus tried. God knows he tried. He went through the motions of parenthood like a man sleepwalking through a nightmare. He packed lunches with hands that shook. He read bedtime stories with a voice that cracked on every third word. He showed up to parent-teacher conferences and sat in chairs that felt too small for the weight of his grief. But inside, he was disintegrating. The man who had once been their rock was crumbling into sand, and every day that passed, he felt more of himself slip away. The drinking started as a whisper and became a scream. It wasn't just about numbing the pain, though that's how it began. It was about finding a place where Elena still existed, even if that place was just the blurred edges of his memory after his 6th drink. It was about silencing the voice in his head that told him he was failing, that his children deserved better, that he was watching them grow up in the shadow of his unraveling and doing nothing to stop it. Sarah started making her own breakfast because she knew her father wouldn't wake up in time. Daniel stopped asking for help with his homework because the man at the kitchen table barely recognized the questions, let alone the answers. And Maya, sweet Maya, learned to be quiet, to make herself small, because loud children reminded their father of a world he could no longer bear to face. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning when Marcus woke up on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken glass, with no memory of the night before and his children staring at him from the doorway with eyes that held more fear than love. In that moment, with clarity that felt like a blade cutting through fog, Marcus understood something that would define the rest of his life and theirs. He was not saving his children by staying. He was drowning them. What does it take for a parent to admit they're the problem? Most of us spend our entire lives running from that kind of truth, building elaborate fortresses of denial and justification. But Marcus, in his broken state, found something most people never access, the courage to see himself clearly. And what he saw was devastating. He saw a man whose presence had become a poison. He saw children who flinched when he raised his voice. He saw a home that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. And he saw the arithmetic of love, the brutal calculation that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from the equation. His sister, Catherine, had always been the steady one. While Marcus had been the dreamer, the risk-taker, the one who believed passion could overcome practicality, Catherine had built a life of quiet competence. She was married to a man named Robert who coached Little League and volunteered at the library. They had one daughter, Emily, and a house with a backyard big enough for 3 more children to run wild. When Marcus called her that Sunday afternoon, his voice was barely a whisper, but his words were the clearest thing he'd said in months. I need you to take them. I'm not asking. I'm begging. Catherine didn't hesitate. She didn't lecture him or judge him or demand explanations. She simply said yes, packed a bag, and drove 6 hours to collect the wreckage of her brother's life. She found 3 children who looked like they'd forgotten how to breathe deeply, who moved through their own home like guests afraid of breaking something valuable. She found a man who could barely look at his own reflection. And she understood, perhaps better than Marcus himself, that this wasn't abandonment, this was sacrifice wearing the ugliest disguise imaginable. The day Marcus left, he didn't say goodbye. He couldn't bear to see their faces, to hear Maya ask when he was coming back, to watch Sarah's jaw tighten with the kind of anger that comes from being let down one too many times. He left a letter, handwritten on notebook paper, with words that trembled across the page like a man confessing sins he couldn't even name. He told them he loved them. He told them they deserved better. He told them that Catherine and Robert would give them the life he couldn't. And then he told them the hardest truth of all: he was broken in ways he didn't know how to fix, and he refused to let his brokenness become their inheritance. He checked himself into a rehabilitation facility 300 miles away, a place where men went to confront the demons they'd been running from their entire lives. He didn't tell Catherine where he was going. He didn't give them a phone number or an address. He simply vanished, leaving behind 3 children who would spend the next several years trying to make sense of a father who loved them enough to leave. Catherine's home became a kind of sanctuary, though sanctuary isn't always soft. It was structure where there had been chaos. It was bedtimes that meant something and meals eaten together without the undercurrent of dread. It was homework checked and scraped knees bandaged and birthday parties that weren't overshadowed by the specter of adult pain. Robert taught Daniel how to throw a curveball and showed up to every single one of Sarah's debate tournaments. Catherine braided Maya's hair and sang songs that Elena used to sing, keeping alive the memory of a mother while gently becoming something like one herself. Catherine sent updates occasionally, brief, careful messages that arrived like whispers from another world. Sarah made honor roll. Daniel joined the soccer team. Maya lost her first tooth. Marcus read these messages and wept, not with the desperate, drowning grief of those early days, but with something quieter, more bittersweet. Pride mixed with regret. Joy tinged with loss. The complex arithmetic of a love that had required him to become absence instead of presence. 5 years after he left, Marcus came back. Not to reclaim his role as father, he understood that ship had sailed, but to offer something simpler and infinitely more complicated: the truth. He called Catherine first, his voice steady in a way it hadn't been in years, and asked for permission to see his children. She granted it, though she warned him that they'd changed, that Sarah in particular had built walls tall enough to keep out anyone who'd ever hurt her. They met at a park, neutral territory where none of them had any history. Sarah was 14 now, sharp-eyed and guarded, her mother's beauty beginning to emerge through the angles of adolescence. Daniel was 12, taller than Marcus remembered, with an athlete's grace and a wariness that suggested he'd learned to expect disappointment. And Maya, 9 years old, looked at Marcus with curiosity rather than recognition, because memory at 4 years old is more feeling than fact, and the man before her was essentially a stranger. Marcus didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness or understanding. He simply told them the truth, unvarnished, raw, and complete. He told them about their mother's death and how it had shattered something fundamental inside him. He told them about the drinking and the despair and the morning he'd woken up on the kitchen floor and realized he was the danger in their lives. He told them about choosing to leave not because he didn't love them, but because he loved them enough to admit he couldn't be what they needed. And he told them about the years since, about the work of becoming someone who could look himself in the mirror without flinching, about building a life that was small and quiet but finally, blessedly his own. Sarah's response was ice. She told him that leaving was the easy choice, that staying and fighting would have been the brave one. She told him he'd abandoned them when they needed him most and that no amount of self-improvement could erase that fundamental failure. Daniel said nothing, his silence somehow louder than Sarah's anger. And Maya, sweet Maya, asked the question that cut deepest: "Did you ever miss us?" Marcus answered honestly. Every single day. Every single hour. Missing them had been the constant hum beneath every moment of the past 5 years. But missing them wasn't the same as deserving to be with them, and that distinction was the difference between selfishness and sacrifice. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Years passed, slow, grinding years where Marcus remained on the periphery of his children's lives. He sent birthday cards and showed up to graduations, always careful to maintain appropriate distance, never pushing for more than they were willing to give. Catherine and Robert remained the constants, the parents who'd earned their place through presence and consistency. Marcus was the ghost who'd finally become visible, the cautionary tale who'd somehow managed to write himself a different ending. But something shifted. Daniel was the first. At 16, struggling with his own demons, the kind of darkness that runs in families like a genetic predisposition, he reached out to Marcus. Not for comfort or advice, but for understanding. Because who better to talk to about the weight of inherited pain than the man who'd nearly been crushed by it? Their conversations were halting at first, stilted exchanges that felt more like negotiations than father-son bonding. But slowly, over months and years, they found a rhythm. Daniel came to understand that his father's leaving hadn't been rejection, it had been an act of terrible, necessary love. Maya was next. She'd grown into a young woman with her mother's warmth and her father's capacity for forgiveness. She sought Marcus out during her college years, wanting to understand the man whose absence had shaped so much of her childhood. They met for coffee and Marcus told her stories about Elena, about the woman her mother had been before tragedy stole her away. Maya listened and wept and thanked her father for giving her something she'd never had, a sense of connection to the woman she couldn't remember. Sarah took the longest. Her anger had calcified into something close to indifference, a protective shield that served her well until it didn't. It wasn't until she became a mother herself, holding her own newborn daughter in the hospital and feeling the terrifying weight of responsibility, that she finally understood. She understood that love isn't always enough. She understood that sometimes the strongest act of parenthood is admitting your limitations. She understood that her father had looked into the abyss of his own brokenness and chosen to protect his children from it, even knowing that choice would brand him a failure in their eyes and probably his own. When she reached out to Marcus, 23 years old with an infant daughter named Elena in honor of the grandmother she'd never known, she said something he'd waited nearly 2 decades to hear: "Thank you. Not for leaving, the wound of abandonment never fully heals, but for having the courage to admit he was drowning and refusing to pull them under with him. For choosing their welfare over his own comfort. For doing the hardest thing a parent can do and then living with the consequences without complaint or expectation of redemption." Today, Sarah is a therapist who specializes in family trauma. Daniel is a counselor at a rehabilitation facility, helping men like his father find their way back from the edge. Maya teaches elementary school and tells her students that families come in all shapes and sizes, that love can look like a lot of different things, and that sometimes the people who hurt us are also the people who save us. They all three speak publicly about their experience, about the father who left and the aunt and uncle who stayed, about the complex truth that there are different kinds of strength and different kinds of love. And Marcus? He lives quietly in a small town, still working as a carpenter, still going to meetings, still writing letters he'll never send. He sees his children a few times a year, grandchildren more often now. He's not their father in the traditional sense. That role belongs to Robert, who earned it through daily presence and unwavering commitment. But he's something else, something harder to define and no less important. He's the man who taught them that love sometimes means letting go, that strength can look like surrender, and that the hardest choices often wear the face of failure until time and distance reveal their true nature. This isn't a redemption story. Marcus didn't earn back what he lost, and he'll tell you himself that he doesn't deserve to. But it is a story about sacrifice, about the brutal honesty required to admit when you're the problem, and about 3 children who learned that gratitude and pain can coexist in the same heart. They thank him today not because leaving was right, but because staying would have been worse. They thank him because he gave them the chance to grow up in stability instead of chaos, in love instead of fear. They thank him because sometimes the greatest gift a broken person can give is their absence, and it takes a particular kind of courage to offer it. The truth about parenthood that no one wants to say out loud is this: sometimes loving your children means accepting that someone else can love them better. Sometimes protecting them means protecting them from yourself. And sometimes the father who walks away is doing exactly what every good father should do, putting his children first, no matter the cost to his own heart, no matter how history will judge him, no matter how long it takes for the truth to emerge from the wreckage. Marcus left his children with relatives. They thank him today. And in that impossible paradox lives a truth we all need to hear. Love isn't always what we think it is, sacrifice doesn't always look heroic, and the hardest choices rarely come with the comfort of certainty. But they come anyway, and what we do with them, how we face them, how we live with them, how we let them shape us, that's where character lives. That's where real love resides. That's where broken people sometimes, against all odds, manage to do something beautiful.